All right, there we go. So welcome everyone. My name is Kari Kwas. I'm with the Snohomish Conservation District, and here tonight we are doing wet feet gardening, and our featured speaker is my colleague Sara Rocero, habitat and outreach specialist, or flip it, either way it works. And we are so grateful that she can be here this evening, and we're so grateful for the City of Everett for sponsoring these natural yard care classes. So again, my name is Kari Kwas. Earlier today, I was at a farm. So community engagement project manager means a lot of things. We did an agroforestry tour, and then here I am for Everett. So it's a mix of everything. If you want to get involved with the district or show up to one of our events, reach out to me. I'm happy to point you in the right direction as to who would be the person to talk to. And one thing of note I want to share from the district side is that Orca Recovery Day is coming up on October 15th, 2022. That is 2 Saturdays from now. I know Sara knows because she's helping plan with that event. But we will be out there again supporting our southern resident killer whales. So today, for asking questions, please use the Q&A, or feel free to use the chat as well. You can reach either me or Sara. I'll pass questions off to her as we go. We are recording this, and I will send this out after, probably, again, it's Thursday. Last week I sent it on Friday, so I'll do that again tomorrow, and then you can share this with friends. Also, just again, some of you probably know what a conservation district is by now, but just in case, we're one of 45 districts across the state. If you think of us like a fire district, or what a fire district does, we just do it for conservation, which means we protect soil, water, air, a lot of our natural resources, and we provide free technical assistance, a lot of education like this, and we'll come out to your property and kind of give you a best case scenario of what we think you might want to do once we hear your plans. We're non-regulatory, and so we are just here to help. And you can read all of those different things that we work on. But in this case, we're talking about more green stormwater infrastructure and native plants within an urban environment when we do our work with the city. So only rain down the drain. Again, Everett sponsors these classes, and 75% of pollutants enter Puget Sound from stormwater runoff. Last week, April did a really great presentation about the journey of a raindrop, and talks about how when it falls from the sky, how it hits your house or your yard or your driveway or the street. And most of that water, when it hits that, goes untreated into Puget Sound. So they sponsor these natural yard care classes in order to help with what's happening on the ground. So that way the water that is going out is cleaner. So the plants that Sara will be talking about today will certainly apply to that. Rain gardens as well. There's many different ways that you can protect our waterways. And then there's 2 more events coming up. Well, excuse me, one. Tonight's the wet feet gardening, and then on Saturday, October 15th, April will be leading a rain garden tour. So that'll be in North Everett. And once you register at everett.eventbrite.com, we will send you a location of where to meet for the tour. And we'll probably be out and about for about 2 hours looking at different rain gardens and seeing how they've progressed over time. It's really interesting. If you're looking at doing a rain garden on your property, it's nice to see how they change and grow over time. So please register and join us for that as well. And then just quickly, last week, if you were on, we had our WCU Master Gardener available to us. They were available tonight, but we definitely wanted to highlight their program. The 3 of us, the district, the city, and then WSU, Snohomish County Extension, work in partnership on natural yard care. So when you get the newsletter from the city, they help with that. Mary Watts is the new Master Gardener Program Coordinator, and so you'll get to meet her if you attend any of their events coming up. Virginia helped us last week. But their whole deal is about the same thing as us: water and food security and the environment. So they are going to be doing a class here soon about growing groceries, and so that empowers people to be able to do that at their houses. And the Master Gardener Program, these are kind of resident experts on plants. They have a helpline that you can call when you just don't know what to do, but they also can design gardens too in your landscape. So that's the program, or the plant problem hotline. And it's great to call because they will actually take time and research whatever it is your issue is. They really like plant pictures or pictures of what you're seeing. Sometimes it's hard to verbalize what you're talking about. So if you can send them a picture of what the plant looks like or what you think is wrong, or maybe it's a pest or something, then they can help you that way. And you can email them. And there's the growing groceries thing. And lastly, you can go to their website, the extension at WSU, Snohomish/Snohomish Garden and Master Gardener program to get more information. Or if you want to be a Master Gardener, you can join them too. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Sara. And Sara's been in many roles at the district, but her experience, you see her in this picture, not only with binoculars, but also in waders. So out in the water doing something, but she's worked on crews. She works our plant sale. She has a strong interest in birds and habitat. So when you hear from her, she's talking about it not only from the benefit of an environmental standpoint, but also from like what would be good for the critters and birds and things that live around us. So always reach out to Sara if you have any habitat questions, because she'll help you there too. But I think that's my last slide. And so I will turn it over to Sara and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Kari. Really appreciate it. It's great to be back into the wet habitat and a webinar game. Yeah, just a quick thank you to City of Everett for helping put on this natural yard care series. It's a great series every year. I'm continually fascinated about their creativity of types of workshops that they're putting on for the public. Just a huge benefit. It's free. Can't say enough good things about it. So some of the things we're going to be covering today, yes, it will be about plants. So we're going to talk about soil assessments, what types of soils are, better at holding water, what are some different types of soils that, actually allow water to infiltrate. There's different things happening there. Talking about right plants for right locations and some of those more challenging locations too. I give some plant species suggestions. So if you're here to be like, tell me what plants I need to plant in this wet area, we'll cover some of that as well. And then of course, I'm going to go into some of the benefits of using natives, especially. So as we go into this, I'm going to just advocate for going native. So a lot of our native plants are specially adapted to our climate and our soils here. In the Pacific Northwest, more specific, Western Washington, and then getting down to that micro level, Snohomish County, and then whatever city or unincorporated area you're in. They're really good at being able to resist our native pests and disease, and they do a really good job of not requiring water once they're established, and they're really great at providing year-round habitat for our local wildlife. And for our own aesthetic enjoyment. So I have pictured here bog bean. It's a specialized plant that loves wetlands. I've seen it here and maybe different places where they have it for sale. But I've also seen it out on hikes and in bogs and things like that. And it's a really cool frilly flower. So definitely one that's adapted to full sun and things like that. So first, we really want to talk about assessing the area that you're interested in gardening in, some of the challenges you're having, and it really just comes down to some of these environmental factors. So what's at play is going to be water, soil, and sunlight. All of those are going to direct and have specific guidelines for what's going to work in that space. So here I have Labrador tea. For those of you who don't know, it's specifically found in very acidic areas, wetlands, specifically bogs as well. And it's really hard to establish in other areas. So it's just a great key factor when really diving into very specialized plants and specialized areas, those challenging wet locations, right? So really saturated in the winter, tends to dry out in the summer, and that really will guide what is going to work in that space. So I would be remiss if we did not briefly talk about soil as we talk about wet feet gardening. So we have the soil triangle here. For those that haven't seen this before, it goes into these different factors of how soil is, what it's comprised of. So the soil particles are sand, silt, clay. Clay is, of course, not going to be something that allows water to infiltrate as much. And then silt is really in the middle, and then sand is really the biggest soil particle that we have in soil. Then, all the bigger things are rocks and everything else. But so it's these soil particles mixed with organic matter and other broken down parent material, so larger rocks and things like that. So it's kind of really interesting as you are digging in areas for planting. You really want to get familiar with what type of soil you're working with, which will guide you into what plants are possibly going to work in that area. Something I like to do is kind of make a soil ribbon. So you take some soil, you can rub it on your hands. If it's really dry, you want to get it a little wet so it kind of compacts and you can form it into a ribbon. And then really being able to feel what are those finer particles in there? Do you feel some sand where it's a little gritty? And so being able to be in tune with the different types of soil types you have on your property and in your yard will help guide you as you're thinking about plants that will work for this area. And then of course, taking into sunlight as well. So kind of a little deeper into the sand, silt, clay is really the soil texture and how well it lets water infiltrate. So of course, sand is going to let water percolate down through. Silts, that's that medium size, so it's still getting in there. And then clay really has these very small soil pores where the water doesn't infiltrate really well. And it can be leading to, those very saturated areas, small puddles, smaller depressions in your yard where it's just like the most hard thing to get established. And clays can be really difficult to work with, but it's just kind of getting into those cues of, okay, what's the soil like? How saturated does it stay during the fall, winter? And then getting into spring, and then how well does it dry up into the summer? So we have different soil horizons too. Some of you may or may not have an O horizon. It's really just that humus, having, partially decayed organic matter. Sometimes the leaf litter can be incorporated into this O horizon. And then the A horizon is really the best place for plants. So that's going to be that perfect topsoil. It's pretty dark, not too gray or anything like that. But you can dig around these various spots and see, how deep is your soil horizon for the A area. And then being able to also, if you have a very small topsoil layer, compost, if you compost at home or have some leaf litter you can spread in different areas, that's slowly going to break down and help you build up your soil if you have poor soils on your property. And in some cases, not always, sometimes soil health and how rich it is in nutrients can be dependent on its color. So sometimes the darker soil you have, possibly the more nutrients it may have. This can differ, soil is very complex, but just some of those small cues that you can really pay attention to, and then start to plan out, some of the plant designs you want, and how to really incorporate those into a holistic manner that, is as aesthetically pleasing, and you're able to enjoy those spots of the yard where, either grass isn't growing very well or it's just too saturated to really get anything started in there. So one thing we see a lot when we're going out to areas and doing free site visits to folks is that a lot of areas where you have, a bigger development or development that happened years ago, they're really going to alter that topography in that area. So as you can see here, we have some dozers, some backhoes, things like that. And they're really leveling the whole area. So in some cases, they're, removing the topsoil, and it can be hard pan, but you're dealing with different soils. than what was there, because they need to lay the foundation. And it's the woes of development sometimes in terms of what soils you have on your property. In some cases, they will bring topsoil in from local areas to, establish the grass if they're rolling out sod. Sometimes they don't do that. It really depends on the builder. But you can always improve your soil by adding compost and using wood chips. And having healthier soil is really going to make an impact when it comes to stormwater pollution and how it's able to filter out those pollutants before it goes, into our sewers or our waterways and things like that as well. So we're going to get into some wet sites. I have bog bean here. It's such a good one, such a friendly, beautiful plant. And then, as many of you may know, willows, especially here pictured as Pacific willow. Willows love to be in wet areas. So it's really just a great demonstration of some of the plants that really like more saturated soils and do really well in different types of their environmental conditions. So, bog bean and Pacific willow can do really well in full sun areas. Willow can get pretty big, so it's specialized. If you have a smaller yard, maybe that's not going to be the best plant there. And we're always able to, think about maximum growth. What's mature growth going to look like when you're looking at plants and something that's going to work into your yard? Having things spaced at different increments for the size of the maturity is something you want to plan for. And then Pacific bleeding heart, which is a favorite at our plant sale that we have every year, usually towards the beginning. And this one is really specialized for part shade. So if you have some shady areas in your yard, this one's a great ground cover. In some cases, folks are intermingling this with other plant species, but it really likes that really moist soil as well. And so plants will really tell you what the soil is like there. What are some of the conditions? I know anytime, this photo on the left, anytime I see skunk cabbage, also known as swamp lantern, that is a plant that is an obligate. So an obligate is very, very wet soil. And so when you see things like that, that clues you into, okay, this is a really wet area. And this is very similar to horsetail. So horsetail, I get popping up in my grass everywhere. It's an area where I direct my rain barrel overflow to. And so there seems to be always just so much horsetail there. And it's because they really like that moist soil. So having that yard assessment is pretty critical when you start to plan for some gardening and things like that, to clue you into, where are my really dry areas? Where are those really wet areas? Where are areas where they don't seem to be very wet, but still have pretty moist soil? Looking at plants and then kind of doing some digging around into, what are some of their environmental conditions that they enjoy. And it kind of informs what plants are really going to be doing well there. I think in most conversations I have with people, one of the biggest things they say is, I want a low maintenance yard. And sometimes, the answer for them is going to be going native with native plant species. So once that plant is established, we always recommend watering in the first year to really help with establishment. I think more as the roots grow, you're going to have more success with it finding water and not needing to be watered during the summer. They can show signs of stress, but after that, the next year, next dry summer, it shouldn't need watering after that. And that's why anytime someone asks me when, how can I get a low maintenance yard? It's like, go native, plant those native plants. There's also nurseries around here where you can find native plants. It's not just through our plant sale, and have success in establishing plants, especially if you're doing planting through October through April. That is the best time to be planting. Not always the most ideal time, understandably, but the best time, because the roots are going to be able to establish before it gets too warm and dry. And, depending on the type of plant, really having a lot of that bigger vegetation growth. So assessments of their site is really key to having an understanding of what's going on and how you can really work with what you have on your property versus trying to force it to go in a different direction. So some of these really specialized wet sites, Sitka willow is a different one from Pacific willow. It doesn't get as big as Pacific willow, in my opinion. It still gets really big, but there can be different cultivars of willows that you could use on your property if that's something you're really looking for. Willows, especially, a really good host plant for butterflies. And then we have some small fruited bulrush, which is a plant that really likes to be in saturated soil. So this is one of the plants that we use in rain gardens in zone 1. So kind of like that bottom of the rain garden where it's going to get all that water coming in and then slowly infiltrating. And then salmonberry, you'll see salmonberries in areas where they're really wet and pretty dry. So it has that versatility to be able to tolerate different conditions. And I love salmonberry because the flowers are beautiful and you always see hummingbirds near them, but the berries are quite delicious as well. And then some rose as well. Swamp rose is really good, and some of our wetland projects that we have, you can use the hips and tea and things like that, but it's going to be one of those ones that can really tolerate those wet conditions and being able to grow and have lots of benefits in terms of, aesthetically pleasing. It could be a good barrier plant. So if you want an area where you want to kind of keep folks out, it's a little thorny, so it hopes to discourage, people or animals and things like that. So here's just a dump of a bunch of plant species. So going into kind of the full sun, we have, the trees and the shrubs. So the willows again. Some of these are so versatile that they could be planted in drier soils to moist, but also really tolerate those wet areas. And I will let you know that you don't have to write all of these down right now, because as Kari said, we recorded this, but if they're, I'm happy to provide a PDF of these slides too. So just wanted to put that warning if people are like, okay, I gotta get all these plants down. And then we got sedges and bulrushes, even some of the nice annual flowers that we have here that are native to this area will do really well. And one of my favorites is Oregon iris, or Douglas iris as well. It can be on this list. Granted, I couldn't list everything, but I sure did try, didn't I? The one thing about some of these herbaceous plants is that not all of them are going to be evergreen. Some of them are. So for example, some of these sedges are pretty evergreen-like. I also apologize because I have 2 dogs here and 1 puppy who just wants to play with the other dog. And I'm the only human in the house right now. So we're going to take advantage of that opportunity. So I just apologize for any background noise. But one great thing is that Henderson's checker mellow, it can tend to be evergreen where the leaves don't die back all the way. And I feel like that's one factor that influences folks' decision on what plants to have in their yard, because they want to see something there almost year round, right? If it's like a shrub, you're like, okay, it doesn't have leaves, but it's still there. And it kind of informs areas where you could fill in if needed. But best thing about Henderson's checker mellow is that the flowers are edible. And so I think it's a perfect addition to do on like summer salads and things like that, because who doesn't love to eat flowers? I mean, maybe people don't, but I think it's really fun. Yeah, so the ones that are bolded are going to be more of that versatility in terms of the type of environmental conditions that it can handle. And then moving on into part shade, full shade, we still have a lot of great options for plants. I think in some cases, areas that are not the Pacific Northwest, they have a lower number of native plants that can work in full shade, but just based on our climate and, our ecosystems around here, we have a lot of diversity in terms of plants that can tolerate that shade from all of our big conifer trees versus something that is going to work in full sun around houses where you might not have a lot of trees, but you want to get some plants established and have opportunities to see butterflies and birds and everything else. So some of my favorites here, bunchberry does pretty well in wet areas. I know not all of these can be ideal for every person's yard, but I think it's kind of, finding something that you like, seeing if there's a nativar or cultivar. So it's a little different than the native plant species and that it's been hybridized with something else. But something like the red osier dogwood is a really fun plant to have. And they do have a dwarf version of that. And so it's being able to, see what's available and then being able to look at what are some nativars and cultivars of some of these plants that you can use. A really good example of this is alum root. So we use a lot of alum roots when we plant rain gardens, and there's lots of different cultivars of it. So some of the leaves are going to be, that dark plum color, some are bright lime green, versions, all the shades of versions of green you could possibly think of in sometimes. And then some of the cool, reddish, purplish leaves as well. And all of those have variations in terms of wanting part shade, but then also wanting full sun as well. So being able to tune in, okay, what are the options of native plants around here? And then what are some variations that are going to work in my yard for the space that I have? I think in my experience, space is limited for me. And so I did a lot of overplanting because I was worried that things would not survive. Gosh darn it, did they all survive? And now I'm moving plants around during the fall and winter to try to get more plants established in different areas where, maybe something wasn't doing so well or didn't quite work for that space, and trying to rearrange my yard as I rearrange my house. And sometimes it's just a fun experiment of, I'm going to try not to kill this plant, but I'm also going to move you to see if you work better in this area. I'll definitely see some signs of stress in terms of maybe this area doesn't have enough water for this plant, or maybe it's just too much sun. And I think that's where it comes to, having some bigger things established first and doing your planting in stages. So my favorite, the versatile plant species. So starting from the top is something that can really tolerate the more water, all the way to something that can still tolerate some saturated soils, but can also really be in that drying zone as well. And as a lot of us see, is that strawberries are just all stars in most cases, a really good ground cover. It's nice when you have a ground cover that can, spread on its own and really stay low, but then have benefits of fruits that you can eat, great for bees and everything else. And it's about being able to just tune in to some of the different assessments that you made of your yard, right? So we're always going to start with that assessment and then going and be like, okay, where can some of these versatile plant species go? Where am I going to really need those specialized plants that are really loving that saturated soil? So some wet areas can be perfect for rain gardens. It really depends on the soil as well. So what makes the rain garden kind of work specially is having this gutter or downspout directed into the rain garden. So of course you're going to get rain from the sky that's going to come in, but being able to use some of that runoff from your roof that goes into your downspout in straight into the rain garden. So we plan to have ponding depths of 6 to 12 inches for these. And I'm going to show you a series of photos, kind of the steps of, making a rain garden. I think in some cases, folks think, okay, I have to pull all of that soil out of my yard and then refill it with different soil. It seems overwhelming and slightly intimidating, but you can do it. And you can also do it with help because the city of Everett has their own rain garden program. So first we start with a design. Most designs do have some curves in it. One of our engineers in the past really loved to do like kidney bean designs. So it kind of gives it, a little more flow, a better aesthetic. So this is the start of the rain garden. So you can kind of see the different soil horizons. This one actually has really good soil. And then you can kind of see in this area over here, this is the downspout, and that downspout is going to be directed into the rain garden. And same with this one. And excuse me, the rain garden size is really going to be based off how much catchment from that roof is going to go into that rain garden. So being able to do some assessments of site suitability. Is the area I want this rain garden, is it going to be the best place? And so we'll try to talk about what that looks like later. So some of the soils we use for rain gardens is a bioretention soil. So do you remember earlier when I mentioned the soil particles? So what was the smallest one, right? It was clay, and then we go to silt, and then we go to sand. So sand is that biggest soil particle where it really allows water to infiltrate very well. So this bioretention mix has a mixture of sand and compost. And what sand and compost makes is just this wonderful mix of being able to let water infiltrate down into areas where maybe they didn't infiltrate as well, and lets the water keep percolating down, and going down into the soil, maybe into aquifers depending on where you are, but ultimately it's going to be cleaning out that water before it makes it into our local waterways. And so you can see how dark and rich this soil looks. That's that compost at work. And compost, I'm not a chemist by any means, but it really does a good job of attaching pollutants to it. And so that's that purpose of, having so much compost and organic material. And that's why healthy soils really do a way better job than some of the poorer, possibly like hard pan soils that we have in some of these areas, of filtering water and reducing those stormwater pollutants. As Kari pointed out earlier, it was like 70 or 75% of the pollution going to the Puget Sound is from stormwater runoff. And being able to garden those wet areas, install native plants, do things like rain barrels and rain gardens is super beneficial to our local environment, and especially the health of our, Puget Sound water quality in general. So this is the same garden here, just at a different angle, and this is kind of looks like what it's after it's planted. So you can't really see that shape anymore, but it definitely has that nice aesthetic flow. Some of the plants in this area here are going to be zone 1 plants, where they really like to have very saturated wet feet, and can tolerate those conditions as it gets dry. And then in this area, it's going to be a little less wet. So we're going to plant things in there that like moist soil, but can tolerate some saturation if the rain garden, fills up after a really large storm. And then these areas on the outside, which we call zone 3, are more of those, moist to dry soils, not getting as saturated as you do inside the rain garden. So a quick summary of some of these wet sites. Some of the go-tos are really going to be those sedges, rushes, and bulrush. Some iris species can really tolerate those wet and dry soils. Plants of the genus Carex, so we got like sluice sedge and things like that. I just want to warn that they are very prolific and very good at what they do. I would start with 1 or 2. They spread by rhizomes and can really take over an area if not maintained. So I would, start with a few and then divide and conquer. And you can also move those plants in other places or give them to friends, give them to neighbors. But I was kind of just like, just watch out for sluice sedge. It's really good at what it does. And then versatile plants are going to be our friends in our changing climate. The summer's been really dry. Who knows what our winter is going to look like? Spring was really wet. And so we're having these, really wet winters and springs, and then very dry in the summer. So having something that can tolerate different conditions is also going to be beneficial in terms of, what's going to keep surviving on your property, and then how to work around it. And then we also have a link to the Rain Garden Handbook for Western Washington. This is going to go through some of that site suitability. So keeping things away from a house a certain distance. I think sometimes the recommendations are like 10 feet. And then doing a soil infiltration test. So digging down into that soil at least 2 feet, having some sort of measuring tape to see how deep the hole is, to make sure you're at that 2 feet. Filling it with water and then timing it of how long that water takes to infiltrate is one of the things we do for site suitability to determine, is a rain garden really going to work best here? So that's something you can kind of do and look into. I'm pretty sure the city of Everett has a link to that rain garden handbook on their website. We do as well, and happy to provide it for folks if that's something they're interested in. So as we talk about establishing plants, some areas are going to, have different plant species that are going to be there. We talked about environmental conditions, and then there's plant associations. So I'm sure you have seen in different areas where there's conifers or some native plants that you typically see, if you're seeing a conifer or a vine maple, sometimes you're going to see the same plants around it, that same area. So plants are very closely associated. And I think that's something really nice to keep in mind as you're doing planning of some of the areas that you want to garden. So some of the wet feet locations of having those saturated soils. Look at what else is associated with that plant and how it can be incorporated into your planting plan, and see if it's available to buy somewhere. We also have a list of native plant nurseries around this local area in Snohomish County to purchase from if that's also something you're interested in to see. But yeah, these are just great examples of plants working together, being interconnected, and in some cases also sharing resources. So that's why we kind of suggest that you look at native plant associations and seeing, what's your favorite? What are some things you can do without? But then really what's just going to work for the natural area. So this is my little spiel about layering and vertical structure. So earlier I talked about, maybe establishing some shrubs if you have the room and if that's something you want to go for. This is something I try to do. So this is my own backyard. Please forgive the left picture where I was just like, oh, this is great to have a branch right in the way, like a little stem. Not a great idea, but it kind of gets the point of, planting an area and being able to look at its growth throughout time. It's definitely a lot more wild than it is now. And I've had to definitely move some plants that I originally had in there because I didn't plan well. But you can kind of see, we have some native plants. I have some crabapple in here. I have black-cap raspberry. And a lot of these plants do accept full sun, but the ground covers, I had to wait another couple years before I was really able to get those established, to kind of let some of the shade and shrubs build up, and then being able to plant in those shaded areas where maybe some of these ground covers are going to do better than they would if there wasn't a shrub nearby to help protect them from the sun. And when we talk about layering, we're starting from the tree canopy height to shrub canopy height, and then all the way down to ground covers. And what this does is really create more biodiverse areas for your natural landscape in your yard. This is beneficial to you as a homeowner or someone who is really interested in starting gardening, and then it's really beneficial for wildlife. So it gives them those year-round resources they need to keep thriving and keep building up their population. So touch briefly on some of these wildlife needs, the 4 basics, and the overarching, goal is to provide food, cover, so hiding spots, water, and places to raise young. So this looks different for every species on what their needs are. But for birds in particular and amphibians, some of my favorites, it's really easy to do. And, sometimes the water, it's not always a bird bath, or you can do little pollinator dishes. Sometimes it's even just having plants in the area where that morning dew comes, and plants or animals are able to use that morning dew. So just wanted to kind of get those top of mind when also planning, and if you're interested in really establishing habitat for wildlife. And these are great to do in wet areas, especially if your wet area is in a shallow depression. You could really establish some of those sedges or rushes to provide amphibian habitat. So a lot of our native salamanders or the Pacific horse frog is something that would really enjoy some of those areas to kind of regroup and, being able to start breeding during that season. So different types of habitat. I think it's really difficult in some cases to know what one species need is. Kind of a blanket of things is to being able to provide small places where they can hide under. So even just like pieces of wood. I have some logs in my backyard where I use kind of a garden border with some wood chips. And, those logs underneath will have lots of insects. They'll have some salamanders. And then I have this pileated woodpecker that was, looking for insects inside the log. Some of our native bees here, many of them nest in trees and things like that. So they're wood nesting, cavity nesting, pollinators and bees. And then toads really love to dig into, either ferns or clumped grass, like tufted hairgrass is another great one. They'll use old rodent holes. I know some people don't want rodents, but if we have like good rodents, they're going to feed the owls and all the other things around here. Having some clump grasses and some ferns are really able to provide some cover and hibernation spaces for them when they are, going dormant into the winter. So another thing that I would urge you all to keep in mind is think about when this flower or when the plant blooms. So some plants bloom really early. We got tall Oregon grape here. Then Indian plum is one of the first bloomers that we'll see in the springtime. And then, being able to space out the plants you have on your property to, start blooming all the way through the fall. Canada goldenrod is a really great one for that. So kind of being in tune and doing just a little bit of research. I think most places where you're researching plants and things like that do provide what season it blooms and kind of where on that spectrum you're able to ensure that you're providing aesthetics for us, because we're like, we like to see things blooming all year round too, and then being able to capture some of those resources for wildlife and ensuring that you're, not only providing habitat early into the season, but really late into the summer season as well. So different wildlife, different needs. Some of the cover can also be used for nesting places. So a lot of our shrubs around here, we also have a lot of ground nesting birds, things like spotted tokies. A lot of our sparrows can nest directly on the ground. So it kind of goes into that layering again, being able to offer a diversity of places for cover and for wildlife to raise their young. Bush tits have this beautiful moss-covered pendulum-like nest that they hang from trees. Whereas you can see this white-crowned sparrow nest, this was just 2 feet off the ground. So it's really that variation of what we're able to offer. I would say that, we as humans like to be like, this is my yard, Wildlife don't see it that way. So if your neighbor has a tree, that's something you're also able to enjoy and have it kind of incorporated into that wildlife habitat that you're providing on your own property. So a lot of bees, I said some for cavity nesting, but 70% do nest into that ground. So having some areas where you have some bare soil is really beneficial to those bees, especially things like, bumblebees, some of those leaf diggers, need some of those spaces to being able to dig out and then lay some eggs. So, bare soil isn't always ideal for some people, but having some small spaces where they can utilize and or something for like mason bees being able to pack in with dirt or soil. Dirt is soil, but I like saying soil more. And then it's about that time where the flowers are dying back and we're really wanting to get a little tidy with our yards. I would urge you, if you have some things like coneflowers, being able to wait until spring before you cut back those deadheads. So this graphic was created by Heather Holm, who does a lot of research with pollinators and wasps, and really wanted to tune people into, when we should be cutting back these things. So this graphic is telling us to cut those deadheads back in spring. Not only is that beneficial to these stem nesting bees, but it's also really beneficial to our local wildlife. So our state bird, the American goldfinch, loves to utilize deadheads in the winter. So they're out there picking the seeds that are still left, and it's a big resource for them when there's not a lot of options available. So I would urge you to leave the leaves in some areas where you can, unless you just absolutely cannot tolerate the mess. Maybe put them in a pile somewhere and have a designated, leaf area for wildlife, especially for the birds. And then being able to, if you don't want to leave all the dead heads on, maybe leave some of those ones where they're a bit taller and definitely have that hollow stems, so you can be leaving some of that habitat for bees. And why are we doing this? Why are we gardening? What is up with urban areas and not having many trees? Well, one thing that I'm trying to do at the district is to create more habitat corridors in urban areas. So I'm starting a program called Homes and Habitat, subtitle Nesting with Nature, and being able to help folks establish native plants, create planting lists. And then my goal within the next couple of years is being able to, offer help with doing this. What are some of your challenges and barriers to planting native plants on your property? Those are things I'm starting to learn. But the goal is to really have these spaces for wildlife to move through in urban areas. And we can do that with planting our front yards, our backyards with native plants. I don't think in many areas there are ways to get native plants cheaply, but they don't have to be expensive. They grow really fast, and being able to start with a small plug, a 4-inch pot, that in a year or two is going to be a bigger plant than it was, which is a given. But I think some people don't always like to start small with plants and kind of want to see that big shrub now. But having it grow and having it start as a smaller plant is going to be better on your pocketbook if you don't want to spend hundreds of dollars of plants, which is totally understandable. So I have a lot of resources here for you folks. Again, this will be recorded and you can reference back, but some really great things. This Grow Your Own Native Landscape Guide from WSU Extension has those native plant associations in there. And then these are just lots of references in terms of developing a plant list for your area and specifically for your yard. And then being able to get clued into some of these wildlife needs of various wildlife. So if you're into birds, you're going to go to All About Birds for from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and then, pollinators. There's great resources out there that y'all can explore, and being able to see, what's your favorite, what are you going for, and how can you provide those 4 critical elements for wildlife, which is food, cover, water, and places to raise young. So plant sources, I kind of looked up some of the plants that I referred to for those wet species. I looked ahead, and most of those are available at some of these nurseries here. Tadpole Haven, really great. Some Woodinville. They're not always close, but I think being able to get clued into where some of these places are, so you can kind of plan out some of the plants you want, and then seeing what's available or what will be available soon. And we have our very own Cariquaft here next to that was red flowering currant, I believe. See, that's red flowering currant. There's 5 bare root shrubs in that bag, and I think we sold it for $8 or $10. So it's really beneficial for the pocketbook to start small, start bare root, not potted in soil, but still going to thrive in your yard. And then I just want to point out that this is that Henderson's checker mellow that is edible and beautiful on salads. So just wanted to see if there's any questions y'all have.
I laugh because some of the plants at our plant sale this year, but were so big.
They were big.
And you never know what you're going to get when you're dealing with kind of that dormant late season, or the prep for the season. There's a better way to say that. But yeah, in some cases we will say, oh no, they'll fit in your car just fine. And then this year, if you got big leaf maple, I think the red flowering currant, and there was at least one more, they were huge.
Yeah.
Well, it varies year to year. Thanks for all those links, Sarah. Actually, this is a really great presentation. There's so much information there. And I think what I'm reminded about all the time is it goes back to the foundational piece of soil, and your soil quality and health really matters of what you can actually plant. But also, if you do just have clay, the water hits it and it has nowhere to sink in. So planting plants can also help with that infiltration, and then they're pretty to look at, and then they provide food for animals and things. So it all ties together. So it's kind of a nice synthesis, I think. So, but at this point, there aren't any questions. Some people have said hello here and there, and I have put the call out if people have questions. One I had, you actually answered for me, which is, did you name your program yet?
The program is named. It's not official. I should probably get it verified by the larger boss. But yeah, we had a survey and really got the public input we wanted for what do folks want this program to be named. It was a top choice, and so being able to have some input from the public and have some ownership in the program. This program is for you all. It's really excited to get it started, and definitely want to learn. If folks want to email me at this email address, some of the challenges and barriers. What do you need help with? What can I really identify in terms of the funding we need to help you garden in those wet spots, to help you improve your soil, so we can all do our part in reducing stormwater runoff and filtering that water before it enters our waterways.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So last call, folks. I would encourage people to sign up. There's a few more spots left for the Rain Garden Tour on October 15th. And that same day, about an hour plus after the Rain Garden Tour, there's Orca Recovery Day in Marysville. I don't know if you just want to mention a little bit about that, Sarah.
Yeah, so this is our 4th or 5th Orca Recovery Day. We are going to be at the athletic complex, Strawberry Fields in Marysville. So we'll be doing a riparian tree planting. I'm going to be leading a guided nature walk, and then we're going to have some activities for the kiddos. So we want it to be a big family affair. We're crossing our fingers for good weather, even though I feel like for the past month, I'd be like, please rain. So it's very selective in terms of when we want rain, right? Yeah, it should be a fun time. It's from 10 to 12, trying to get it in right before lunch hour and folks get hangry. Yeah, we're gonna have some education resources. You can take part in planting some big trees and doing something that's gonna benefit orcas and water quality.
Yeah, that's great. And now we have some questions. See? Last call. So, okay. Susan says, I'm doing a lasagna garden over my horrible lawn. Any suggestions?
Oh, okay. How are you layering, Susan? Are you using cardboard? Are you going to be incorporating wood chips? I would 100% signing up for chipdrop.com where you can get free arborist wood chips. We don't typically recommend beauty bark because beauty bark doesn't have that nutrient or water holding capacity that wood chips do. Or you can go the route of getting something delivered like animal friendly hog fuel. That's one of the wood chips that we use in rain gardens, especially because it kind of really holds together and doesn't get washed out like some of the other ones can, like cedar wood chips. I would still recommend cedar wood chips. They're just, more expensive and not everyone has the pocketbook for that. But yes, so being able to incorporate some compost. I have an unexpected visitor. Sorry. So yeah, being able to incorporate some compost is going to really help with building up that soil. And then being able to add wood chips on top to help like break everything down and then plant in that. So
Mute for a second, and she wrote in and said she has manure, then cardboard, then wood chips, and then followed with the soil is exhausted, so she's trying to help it out. And she says her dogs help too, so there's always understanding.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and Susan, reach out to me if you want to send me some pictures. I'm happy to give you some very specific guidance and recommendations, or if you just want to chit chat about your process and ensure that you're on the right track. But it sounds great so far.
And then a question came in from Facebook from Lisa. She said, I have a farm and I want to have a rain garden, but worried about wetlands.
Has a farm. Sorry, can you repeat that, Corey?
Yeah, she has a farm. She wants to do a rain garden, which I know we've done. I mean, we've done rain gardens on farms, but she said she's worried about wetlands.
Oh, I mean, I don't know for sure. I would have to see the space. But I feel like we always, with rain gardens, have some sort of overflow. So I don't think the wetland would be a problem. I think it just really comes down to the site you're thinking about and whether or not that's going to work for a rain garden. But we definitely have larger properties, larger farms where they have rain gardens or bioswales, and also have wetlands. So I think it's just maybe tailored to your specific situation. And we're always happy to come out for a free site visit and walk that through with you.
Yeah. And Susan will reach out to you, she said, so that's great. I mean, honestly, that's some of the best stuff that we can do is to help and come out and answer your questions. It's nice when a land manager has a vision of what they're thinking. So we're not walking in trying to create something on your space that you're not interested in. But if you have questions specifically about either growing trees or having native plants or a rain garden or whatever it is, you have that idea in mind, and then we come in with resources tied to that subject and can point people in the right direction. That's always helpful.
Absolutely.
So I don't think I'm seeing any more questions right now. Coming back to the lasagna gardening though, I would say that at one point in time I had like an old, I'll call it a bridge, but it was basically a walkway of some sort that we put in our front yard, wrapped it in a tarp. And that became the device that then created all of our beds. And I know over time you can certainly kill grass with just about anything that blocks out the light. And it doesn't have to be all right now. You can take time to do that sort of stuff and create small spaces that can grow into a larger space. I think Sarah and I both share a love of native plants, and it's really easy to just want to buy more and more and more, but at some level they do grow up. And so reminding, just think about time and everything grows. So give yourself a break and but give it a whirl.
Yeah.
It's the Pacific Northwest. Stuff grows here. Just like puppies.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Oh, he's learning, he's big, he's 7 months, and still is just a little baby.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions, but I'll do one more last call because it worked last time. If anybody has something they'd like to know about, it's changed. It's funny because it sort of rained yesterday, but not really. But that is an indication of fall. I think what is predicted is La Nina again, so that it'll be wet winter. So pay attention to flooding, and reach out to Public Works for City of Everett. They have a 24-hour hotline if you have issues and such, and keep your storm drains clean. Leaves like to fall into those spaces, and that's always tricky too. So any closing thoughts, Sarah? I'm not seeing any more questions.
No, I mean, I think really just assessing the site, learning more about the types of soil you have, what it's comprised of in terms of soil particles, and then really going from there. Doing some experimentation. I think that's easy to do when you're able to get plants a little cheaper and or being able to, just go for it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks to the City of Everett for supporting these classes. Hope people sign up everett.eventbrite.com for the rain garden tour, or come to our Orchid Day event that same day. You can do both. And we'll love to see you out and about again, and give us a call if you have any more questions.
Great. Thanks, Kari, and thanks everyone.
Thanks, Sarah. Have a great evening, everyone. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.